I'm Cindy Winget, the author of The Apparition, and welcome to my channel. So in today's video, we're going to be doing my October wrap-up. I'm going to start out with the DNFs like I usually do, starting with a NetGalley arc that I had called The Last Vampire. And this one wasn't terrible. I mean, I liked the setting and the characters weren't driving me crazy or anything, but it was very Twilight-esque, you know, where you have this YA novel and they meet the vampire and he's sexy. And I mean, it's not like a dot by dot the same as Twilight, but I mean, it's that type of story, you know, where it's just a YA romance with a vampire. And I don't know, I'm kind of over that, and I just didn't want to read it. So I got like 40% in and was like, you know what, I'm not really enjoying this as much as I want to, and this is my favorite time of the year, and I really don't want to spend my time reading a book that I'm not super into. So I decided to DNF it. And then I also had a Kindle ebook of the book Hell Night in Hopewell. If you saw my cemetery video, you'll remember that I only try to read books that actually take place in the fall and around Halloween time in October. Not always, but like for the most part, I really want to try and prioritize the actual holiday in my books. Since I read horror all year long, that just kind of makes it a little bit more special. And so this one does take place on Halloween, and you have this group of teenagers that are going to this abandoned asylum. So love the setting, but unfortunately I only read 2 chapters before I decided to DNF this one, because it's one of those books where the teenagers are just insufferable and I just didn't want to read from them. Just lots of crass swearing, lots of body jokes, you know, of sexual nature, and I just don't like that. I mean, maybe if I was a teenager it wouldn't bother me so much, but as a 38-year-old I don't want to read about that. And I didn't like the whole we're friends but we always act like we hate each other type trope. I hate that. I'm just like, why are you even hanging out if you guys are just gonna bicker and fight? You know, if I want to hear fighting, I can go listen to my children for that. I don't need to read about it. So I just found this book obnoxious, so I didn't read it. So those are the only DNFs that I had. And then I read a few ebooks. One is a novella and then one is like a short story, or maybe technically what do they call it? A novelet, because it's like 80 pages. So that one is called Love in the Time of Pumpkins, and this is a Sleepy Hollow short story. I love reading about Sleepy Hollow during this time of year. It's one of those stories that just seems super autumnal to me. But unfortunately, because this was a short story, it just didn't quite work for me, because the author was trying to make it a full-length novel in a very short amount of time. So it read more like a summary than a short story. You know, writing a short story and writing a full-length novel are 2 very different things, and you really have to have a skill and a knack for one or the other. I mean, not to say that you could have it for both, but I mean, when you're writing a novel versus a short story, you know, you have to write them differently. You have to think about them differently, because you have this really short story and you need to make an impact and impression very quickly, and it needs to all be relevant and it needs to all, you know, flow like a short story. But this one, because they're trying to shove so much into this tiny little book, it just read like a summary, you know, because it was like bam this, bam that, bam this, bam that, and then the end. And you know, it didn't have the time to fully flesh out the characters or what was actually going on, and so it felt like they were just giving me the bullet points for a longer novel that they wanted to write and then couldn't get there, so they just made it into a short story. I mean, obviously I don't know if that's true, but that's how it felt, because you have this woman who is a tour guide at Sleepy Hollow in modern times, and so she takes tourists around and shows them, you know, the old Dutch church and the old houses that used to be there, and talks about the Headless Horseman and the history of the Dutch settlers and all this kind of stuff. And the beginning was great. I really liked it. I liked the characters, liked the setting, liked the setup. But then it was like this, not really conspiracy, what's the word? I guess that's kind of the closest would be conspiracy. But you had this little museum full of these artifacts, and one of the books is an old Bible from that time, and it gets stolen. And so now they're thinking there was some kind of conspiracy and or treasure, or, you know, it felt very much like National Treasure with Nicolas Cage, but about Sleepy Hollow. But they tried to squish it into this tiny little book, and so it just didn't ring true. It was just too fast-paced, too, you know, rushed. And so the latter half of this book just didn't work for me. And they even tried to shove a romance in there, but again, because it's so short, it had to be like insta-lovey, even though it was like an enemies to lovers. I don't know. Like I said, too short. It's really the biggest issue. The writing itself was fine. The short awkwardness. Okay, so now I'm going to be talking about a romance novella called Be My Boo, which I thought was pretty cute. And this is about this man who is a firefighter, and he gets called to this little town to be like an emergency firefighter for the holiday for Halloween. And so they tell him that he needs to go to this purportedly haunted house, which is this abandoned mansion. And he goes there to ward away kids that might want to do pranks or do a seance or, something Halloween fun or get drunk or whatever. He's trying to keep these teenagers away from this house so that they're safe, because obviously with abandoned houses, there's always the fear of getting hurt because the floors and the stairs and stuff aren't stable. So as a firefighter, that was his job for the night, was to stay in this house. But when he gets there, he discovers that there's this lady that's already there, and she's a photographer, and she's taking pictures of the house. And so they strike up this little romance. And just like the other book that I just mentioned, I felt like this romance wasn't super authentic. I feel like it was pretty forced and didn't have the proper development that it needed. But it was a fun little story. I mean, nothing groundbreaking, not a new favorite, but it was enjoyable for what it was, and it was pretty cute. But I'd maybe give it a 3 stars. I guess I didn't give a rating for the Love in the Time of Pumpkins one. I guess a 2.5, because it wasn't terrible. I didn't hate it, but it wasn't as good as Be My Boo. So yeah, I'll probably give it about 2.5. Okay, so now I'm going to be moving on to my physical books. These are not in any kind of specific order. Oops, I just realized I had another DNF and completely forgot. So, Halloween Party by Agatha Christie. Unfortunately, I had to DNF this one because this is one of the most repetitive books I've ever read. It just repeated the same stuff over and over and over and over again. So we had this little girl who died on Halloween. She was bobbing for apples and she was drowned in the barrel. And I hate it when the death is kids. I have a hard time with that, but I felt bad for the poor thing. But anyway, so the person who was giving the Halloween party asks her friend, Hercule Poirot, to come do his detective thing and figure out who killed this little girl. But he just goes to people and asks about this little girl and her character over and over and over again. He'll ask somebody, what are you doing here? Why was she here? What's her personality? Goes to the next person, asks the same thing. Talking to somebody else, asks the same thing. And it was just very, very repetitive and very, very slow. And so I wasn't really feeling this one. And I saw the movie. Even the movie I didn't think was spectacular. It was okay, but it was better than this. So yeah, this was a disappointment for me. And then I finally read Autumn Crow High, Fresh Hell by Cameron Chaney. He's a booktuber. This is the first installment in a series that he plans to write about these YA books that are supposed to be Fear Street-esque. And it truly is that. It's set in the 90s, I believe, and has all the nostalgia vibes and definitely does have the feel of reading a Fear Street book, except for it's quite a bit longer. And I really loved 2/3 of this book. I thought it was really, really fun, very atmospheric, very Halloween-y, but unfortunately the climax didn't quite stick the landing for me, simply because I felt like it was a little too chaotic and fast-paced and too much stuff going on, and so it became a little bit confusing. But I was sick at the time, and so it could have been brain fog, and I just couldn't keep track of everything that was going on. And I don't know, I just didn't feel like it was completely satisfying and not as explained as I would like it to be. But for the most part, I thought this was a really fun read, and I would probably give this 4 stars. And then I read a couple of mangas. Luckily, Barnes Noble was having their buy one get one 50% off sale on all the manga, and it just so happened that the 14th volume of Spy Family had just come out. So yay! I love this series so much, and the little girl in this book is going to this dance, and she wants to dance with the boy that she's trying to get spy intel on for her father, and it was just very cute and very fun, and I really enjoyed this one. And then we also get a lot of backstory on this guy. I want to say he's the headmaster, but I don't think he is. I think he's just a professor at the school that she attends. But we get to know his background and get to know a star-crossed lover type situation in his past, which was also fun. And then the other one I got was the newest by Junji Ito, called Moan. And I absolutely adore Junji Ito. I think he's a great horror mangaka, and I enjoyed this short story collection just like I've enjoyed all of his. Obviously, some stories are better than others, like always, but for the most part, I really enjoyed this. I thought it was really good. There was one in particular, which I think is Moan. I'd have to see real fast. Yeah, so the actual story, Moan, is probably the best one in this book. And, you know, the pictures that go along with it are always like, ooh, you know, makes you squeamish, but in the best way. So recommend it. And then I read a couple of novellas. I got The Cold House. This is a new release, and this is a gothic tale about this woman who moves to this house that has a well in the basement, and she's sleeping one night, and when she wakes up, she's by this well. Like her foot is drifting out into the abyss over this well, and so that freaks her out, you know. And she had just recently lost her husband, and he had not told her that he had inherited a crap ton of money. So now she's rich, but she doesn't really care about it because she's obviously grieving the death of her husband. But she is kind of curious about him now because she's wondering what else he was hiding from his past that she doesn't know about. Sounds like their communication wasn't that good, and so she just didn't know everything about him, and she ends up meeting his family and different things go on. So I thought this was a decent book, but it didn't completely blow me away. And again, it probably is because it's just too short to flesh everything out. So it was good for what it was, but I feel like it's not very memorable. You know, it's just something that you read shortly. You know, I read this all in one day and then you boop, and you forget about it, you know, so it's nothing like groundbreaking or anything, but I did enjoy it, so probably about a 3-star. And then we have William. I wanted to read this last year when it first came out, but I just couldn't get to it. So on Halloween night, we have these people that go to this house for like a dinner party, and then there's this little robot guy that was built by our main character, and he, you know, like most robotic AI type stuff, things don't always go the way that you would hope that they go. So this kind of has a Frankensteinian feel to it, you know, because he builds this robot and it's his creation, but then he realizes that it's hideous and it starts doing bad things and he can't control it the way he thought he could, you know. So it's very much like Frankenstein, which is what drew me to this book in the first place because I love Frankenstein, but this is like a modern technological adaptation of it, and so I thought that was really fun. And the ending did have a twist that I did not see coming. I read some reviews where people thought it was very obvious, but for me it wasn't. I didn't see it coming, so I thought the twist was really good, but I didn't completely fall in love with this book. I thought the first third was very strong, very interesting, very fun, but then it got to like the action parts, and I don't know, the execution just wasn't there for me. I feel like there was a lot of plot holes and inconsistencies, so when books start to have incongruencies like that, I just don't enjoy them as much because I'm like, wait a minute, how could that happen? Because this just happened, you know, and it kind of knocks you out of the story and it drives down my feelings toward the book. And I just don't necessarily like it when action things just go on and on and on and on, especially just depending on the way it's done. And I just didn't love this one for that. So the first third was really good, the twist was good, but it wasn't like a all-time favorite or anything. But so probably a 3.5. And then if you've seen my last video, you already know about this one, but I read Death and Douglas because this one takes place in a cemetery and around Halloween time, and so it had those vibes that I wanted from going to, you know, the fall harvest festival and buying those carameled apples and going through coin mazes and going trick-or-treating. You know, it had all that stuff in it. But we have this little boy who's 11 named Douglas, and he grew up in a funeral home, and so graveyards are kind of like his playground. He's always played in cemeteries. Dead bodies don't bother him. He helps out with the services with his parents all the time. But then a murder happens in his town, and he was kind of under the impression, you know, that only old people died or only natural causes caused death. And so to his young mind, when he realizes, you know, people's lives can be cut short before their time and in very gruesome and traumatic ways, it kind of rocks his worldview a little bit. And then him and his friends are trying to catch the serial killer and take back their safe town. So for a middle grade book, I thought this was fantastically done. I loved the themes. It was to the point, no fluff, and I thought it was really, really fun. I gave this 5 stars because I really have no qualms with it. I thought it was really good. And then I read a YA novel by Natasha Preston called The Haunting. And I'm not really sure why it's called The Haunting because there's nothing supernatural about this book. It's more like she's haunted by the past rather than anything ghostly or paranormal, which I'll admit was a little bit disappointing. I always like to have supernatural elements, but I did still like the book for what it was. this is more of a thriller. And this is about a girl who breaks up with her boyfriend soon after she found out that his dad was this notorious serial killer that has been terrorizing her town. And so her parents are like, stay away from him. You know, he's not good. And she's like, well, he didn't do it. His dad did it, but he didn't have anything to do with it. But she decides to heed her parents' warnings and back off and doesn't see him for like 6 months. But then a copycat serial killer on the loose, and she decides that it's time to go talk to her boyfriend because she still cares about him. She still wants to be his girlfriend. She was just scared and confused and just didn't know what was going on. But so her and her friends try to solve the case. And this one also has all of the Halloweenness that I like, you know, with the coin mazes and dressing in costumes and all of that stuff. So I did very much like the vibes. But again, this is one that's not super memorable. I'll probably forget about this book in a month, but I did enjoy my time while I was reading it. So I would probably give this maybe a 3.5, maybe bump it up to a 4, because it wasn't truly great, but I did enjoy it. And I didn't know who the killer was, so that was a plus. But so yeah, somewhere between a 3.5 or a 4. And then I read another Sleepy Hollow tale called The Spellbook of Katrina Van Tassel. This is a very chunky book. And I discovered to my disappointment that this one is more of a romance novel rather than a horror novel or a thriller or, you know, a dark fantasy, anything like this. This is first and foremost a romance. And I did not know that. So if you want to read this, just know that going in. So if you're familiar with the original tale of Sleepy Hollow, you'll know that Brom Bones and Ichabod Crane have this rivalry where they're trying to get Katrina's hand in marriage, or, you know, gain her attention and her affection. And so that's basically what this book is about, is she's in love with Ichabod Crane and she has a secret affair with him. But then Brom Bones is a better match for her, and her parents really want her to be with Brom because he is a successful farmer and can, you know, bring more money into the estate and be a good match for her, who is the most wealthy person in the town of Sleepy Hollow. And they think, you know, Ichabod Crane, while he's a nice fellow, is kind of beneath her socially. So she's trying to get her parents to reconsider her marriage to Ichabod Crane, and Brom is trying to get Katrina to marry him. And that's essentially what this book is about. And again, if you're familiar with the story of Sleepy Hollow, there's nothing new here. It's pretty much an exact retelling. Well, not exact retelling, but I mean, it's the same story, you know, with nothing else thrown in there. You know, nothing supernatural, no other elements. Although I guess her friend is psychic and Katrina herself can have vision, so I guess there is a paranormal thing to this, but just not in the way that I necessarily wanted. For a book that's called The Spellbook, Katrina Van Tassel, I thought this was going to have a lot of witchiness to it, and it didn't have any witchiness to it really, except for like a teeny tiny bit, because you have the girl psychic and she happens to have remedies made out of herbs, but I mean, that's really it. So The Spellbook of Katrina Van Tassel is really just like a book of folk tales that she writes. It has nothing to do with magic or witchiness. So I did enjoy this one. I know it sounds like I didn't, but I really did like it. But it wasn't what I wanted from it, and I wanted it to be creepier. I wanted it to be more witchy or supernatural. I wanted more of the Headless Horseman. So, you know, I just wanted more. But I mean, if you just call it a romance, then, you know, it is a decent romance. So I will give it that. So I'd probably give this 4 stars. And then I read The Thicket, and this one is the most Halloween-y out of all of them. Has coin mazes, has haunted attractions, has shopping for costumes. It has it all. And so I really, really enjoyed that. And this is about a group of teenagers that go to this haunted house in this field that they erect every year, you know, to have this haunted house. But our main character, her brother, gets murdered while at this haunted house. And so at first they think it's just part of the haunted house and it's fake blood and ha ha ha. But it turns out to be true, and they discover that there's a serial killer that is taking people out one by one as they come to this haunted house. And he's dressed as a plague doctor, which I really enjoyed. I like that image. So this is a YA novel. I don't think I told you that. Yeah, I thought this was really fun. It was, I don't know if I would definitely call it a slasher-esque. You know, it kind of rides the line between being a slasher and just being a serial killer book. But I did enjoy my time with this. I thought it was fun. I didn't completely love the very, very, very end. They ended it in a way that, I don't know, I just don't always love that type of ending. And it also leaves it open so that there could be a sequel, but I don't think there's ever going to be a sequel. And so it just kind of bothers me. I wish it was a little bit more wrapped up with a nice little bow. I know a lot of people don't like that. They like things to be a little bit more ambiguous, but for me personally, I don't. I like things wrapped up. I like things explained. I like everything to feel completed. And, with endings like this, it kind of makes me just want to roll my eyes sometimes. But I did like this one, and I'd give it 4 stars. And then I read The Invocations. This is another YA novel, and this one did give me witchy vibes. This definitely was about witches, so it kind of made up for the Van Tassel one about Katrina. So we have this girl, and I don't know for sure which one is which, but we have a witch, and then we have a girl who sold her soul to the devil, and then we have a girl whose sister died, and she wants to resurrect her. And so both of these girls find this witch to help them in their various things, help her get rid of the demon that's connected to her and her be able to resurrect her sister. I thought this one was really, really fun and really, really unique, and I would give it 4 stars. And then last we have The Resurrectionist, and this is the only book this month, besides The Last Vampire, which I didn't finish reading, that doesn't take place during Halloween. This one is a new release, and I read it just because I wanted to, because I was excited for it. And this one is also a lot like Frankenstein, because you have resurrectionists and, obviously, body snatching and all of that stuff, or grave robbing, I should say, not body snatching. So we have this woman, who lives during a time where she really wants to be a surgeon, but because she's a woman, she can't. And so she's trying to get into medical school, and, she helps this boy rob graves so that they have fresh corpses to practice on and things. But in this blurb, it says she killed her sister twice. And I feel like that's a big spoiler. And so you kind of already know what to expect from this book going in. And there was not too much outside of that. There is a couple of other twists, but even so, I just feel like that gives away too much. So I kind of wish they didn't put that on there. But I love historical horror that's set in Victorian times. I love the macabreness and the body horror that comes with stories like this. So I really enjoyed this one a lot. But I don't know that I would give it 5 stars, because it kind of did that thing in the end where the villain of the story is a little bit too dramatic and comes across as a little bit too cartoony in a way. So I don't necessarily love that. But I did love the story, and I thought it was good. So yeah, I don't think I'd give it 5 stars, but I would give it 4. So this is a 4-star read. So that's all the books I read in the month of October. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up to let me know. Subscribe to my channel if you feel so inclined. I post every Friday, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!